We're told that the Tonale crossover is heart and soul Alfa from the ground up, building on the Milanese maker's DNA of sportiness that stretches all the way back to 1910. That's not quite true, but the Tonale does bring a dash of Latin colour to the segment for posh premium small SUVs and represents the very beginning of Alfa Romeo's forthcoming journey into electrification, with drivetrains that are both of the mild and plug-in hybrid sort. It lacks the Teutonic perfection of some competitors, but you're compensated with enough pavement presence to make key German rivals look very dull indeed.
Striking, sleek and significant, Alfa Romeo's Tonale could hardly matter more to the Milanese maker. The compact SUV comes with electrified engines, a styling nod to the past and a very lovely cabin. Can it win over Teutonic brand customers looking for a change? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So here we are at the beginning of a new era for Alfa Romeo. Another one. That was what we were told when the company launched its first SUV, the Stelvio, back in 2017, and we haven't seen another new product since. But they'll be following thick and fast now, a new model each year for the next decade, with the entire portfolio being fully electric by 2027, which is quite a turnaround, given that as recently as the start of 2022, the brand couldn't even offer you a hybrid, let alone an EV. This one, the Tonale, is a hybrid of the straightforward or the plug-in kind, depending on your preference and bank balance. And it's also an SUV, but this time of the smaller sort, which Alfa reckons will almost treble the proportion of UK buyers who might consider the brand. But what kind of brand now is this? Even if you're prepared to stretch Alfisti values to embrace the idea of a fashion-led, electrified small crossover, you might balk at the idea of it being based on the engineering of a clunky Jeep Compass, as this one is. It wouldn't have been if brand owners Stellantis had bought the Milanese marque a few years earlier. But by the time they did, the Tonale design was too advanced to change. Then when it did appear, quality control problems delayed its introduction for a few more frustrating months. Many potential customers, though, were prepared to wait. So captivated were they by the striking motor show concept car, which this model is based on. Can the reality live up to the hype? And can this car overcome apparently unpromising underpinnings to drive, handle and feel like an Alfa should? Well, you'll need the industry's most comprehensive review, the car and driving road test, to find out. So, is this to be a proper Alfa experience? The 3+3 headlight graphic that greets you on the instrument screen as you get comfortable seems promising, and the start button location on the steering wheel seems typical of the Milanese marque. But on pressing it, instead of the expected flare of revs, there's a most un-Alfa-like silence, underlined by a tiny blue EV graphic on the instrument screen. The engine cuts in afterwards pretty quickly, but it's a sign that even this classic brand has been moving with the times. Given that the Tonale is supposed to be some kind of SUV, you might think that basing it on the engineering of a Jeep Compass might make some sort of sense. The reality, though, is that the SUV genes here are merely token ones. This, in every way that really matters, is the replacement for every historical sporting Alfa compact hatch brand loyalists might be able to think of, going back through the decades. Most recently, the Giulietta, and before that the 147, the 146, the 33, and finally Alfa Sud of the 70s, which was built in the same Pomigliano Diaco factory in Naples that now assembles this Tonale. The Alfa Sud is the car that every small hatch Alfa since has tried and failed to emulate for involvement and charisma. You certainly wouldn't expect a car based on a clunky Jeep and weighed down with hybrid battery tech to replicate much of that old rust-ridden classic model's agile, perky personality. But current brand boss Jean-Philippe Imparato has big claims to make here, promising that this car will have the Milanese brand's classic vibe whatever that means, and equally ambiguously that this is an Alfa Romeo first and then a hybrid. Presumably he means that this car will feel sporty to drive, and sure enough, lots has been done to try and deliver that feeling here. A super quick steering rack, torque vectoring for extra turning traction, frequency selective dampers, and on this plusher Veloce version, adaptive damping and 4-piston brakes. Plus there's Alfa's usual DNA driving mode system. It's the steering feel you noticed first, which isn't surprising because at 13:6:1, the rack ratio is by far the quickest in the class. To give you a point of comparison, a rival Audi Q3's rack ratio is 14:8:1. What that means in practice is a level of pointy agility that the rather crude chassis has a hard time keeping up with. It leaves you with the impression that this car is trying to be sporty, rather than the feeling that it actually is. Still, though rather light and not ultimately as feelsome as an enthusiast might like, it's certainly a more engaging confection than is the class norm. So mediocre is the level of driving involvement in the current breed of small, posh SUVs that any contender at least trying to reward at the wheel is a welcome breath of fresh air. And the Tonale is certainly that. Delivering fresh air is the obvious remit of the car's hybrid systems, which deliver a lot more power than would have been on offer if this car had been based on the same EMP2 platform as its Stellantis Group segment cousins, as it would have been if that conglomerate had purchased the Alfa brand a year or two earlier. Most customers are going to stick with the 1.5 litre VGT, or variable geometry turbo petrol engine we're trying here, which Alfa only imports in its top 160 horsepower form for our market, and insists it must be mated with a 7-speed dual-clutch auto transmission that, in this Veloce model, is marshalled by these glorious Ferrari-style aluminium paddle shifters, which, as on a Maranello model or a Maserati, initially feel rather overlong and are fixed in place so your fingers always find them. This power plant's badged as a hybrid, which would normally lead you to expect the addition of an electric motor on the rear axle. Here though, the 19 horsepower motor is rather cleverly built into the auto gearbox we just mentioned, powering a 48-volt battery that, like a proper full hybrid, can propel the car separately from the engine. However, because it's only 0.77 kilowatt hours in size, it can only do so at very slow speeds and only for a few hundred yards, making it more like the kind of mild hybrid setup that most of this car's rivals offer. With those rivals though, all the 48-volt battery does is add to mid-range throttle response and power the stop-start system. This cleverer hybrid VGT engine, in contrast, works in lots of other ways, and Alfa Romeo has decided to give names for all of them. Silent start is when you prod the start button and the car springs into life, but the engine doesn't. E-launch is where the electric motor pushes you off for the first few meters before the engine quickly springs in to help. E-queuing will keep you battery powered in stop-start heavy traffic, and e-parking will use electric power when you select reverse at parking speeds. If there's any battery charge still left over after all of this by the time you get to the open road, e-boosting will use it to help acceleration. And to help recharge said battery, recuperated energy is reclaimed when you brake. You can probably guess what that's called. E-braking. It seems like an awful lot of effort to go to for the creation of something that at the end of the day isn't quite as good as the kind of self-charging full hybrid engine we've now had on cars of this size for the last 2 decades. It does though make this 1.5 litre mainstream Tonale feel like the proper hybrid it's pretending to be when setting off, manoeuvring and inching along in traffic queues, all of which is accomplished in impressive EV silence. Away from walking pace though, the slightest flex of your right foot introduces the 160 horsepower engine, not always very subtly. And, as with the similarly engineered Jeep Compass e-hybrid, the electronics can sometimes get themselves a little confused as to whether fossil fuel or battery propulsion is required for any given command. For example, the need for a quick burst of acceleration to nip into a gap in traffic, which can lead to a frustrating delay in response. The dual clutch gearbox is smooth but not responsive enough to ever make the car feel in any way rapid. Officially, the rest to 62 mile/hour time is 8.8 seconds, but it doesn't actually feel quite that quick. At least the top speed is satisfyingly un-EV-like, 132 miles an hour. In years gone by, the alternative to this 1.5 litre petrol motor would have been one of Alfa's eager Fiat-sourced diesels, but those days are long gone, for our market at least. So we get an expensive petrol plug-in hybrid instead. The drivetrain, once again, borrowed from the Jeep Compass and once again embellished with a bit of extra power, 275 horsepower in this case. Here, the Jeep derivation is more welcome because it means that the system includes four-wheel drive. With the exception of BMW's X1 plug-in and a couple of ridiculously priced JLR plug-in products in this segment, all this Alfa's other PHEV crossover class rivals are merely front-driven. As is often the case with this kind of powertrain, the engine part of the equation is based on pretty aging tech. In this case, a 1.3 litre Fiat multi-air petrol unit, originally developed for turn-of-the-century Fiat Punto and Tipo hatches that now lie rusting in junkyards. The rest of it's pretty clever though. This power plant supplies 177 horsepower to drive the front wheels and is aided only when necessary by a 121 horsepower electric motor mounted on the rear axle, creating a very different kind of four-wheel drive system to that we've seen on previous Q4 badged Alfas, but nevertheless one that can provide instantaneous deployment of 100% of available torque to either axle. That electric motor is powered by a 15.5 kilowatt-hour battery pack with a WLTP rated driving range when fully charged of 37 miles. The Tonale plug-in's 128 mile/hour top speed is slightly lower than the base model, but the rest to 62 mile/hour time looks usefully more rapid at 6.2 seconds, though in practice the car never actually feels quite that fast, hindered by a lack of low-speed torque and the somewhat lethargic responses of the 6-speed auto gearbox you have to have. This is one of those transmissions that flares the revs wildly as soon as you ask it to do anything out of the ordinary, so you quickly learn gentle applications of your right foot, and with that approach, the Tonale plug-in hybrid Q4 feels quite a pleasant companion in day-to-day suburban duties. You'll need to learn how to use it, of course, and that means mastery over the Alfa Romeo DNA driving mode systems we mentioned earlier. Regardless of powertrain, all Tonales have this, the letters standing for dynamic, think sport, natural, think normal, and advanced efficiency, think eco. If you happen to be the least bit alfisti in your approach to driving, you'll leave it in D nearly all the time because the other settings feel somewhat laboured and gloopy. In the plug-in hybrid, the A setting reverts you to electric drive, and there's the further option of an e-save setting that preserves battery charge for when you might need it later in your journey. All of these eco tools, though, are things you can have in more ordinary segment rivals. You'll want the Tonale to also have more of a wild side, and as we suggested earlier, the Milanese engineers have done what they could do to oblige. That super sharp steering encourages you to experiment with the extra cornering grip generated by the torque vectoring system, the electronic self-locking differential, the wide track, and the grippy Pirelli P0 tyres. While extra chassis strengthening and careful suspension geometry tuning limit cornering body roll to almost family hatch-like levels, helped by near-perfect weight distribution between the two axles. There's also a very effective cutting-edge IBS brake-by-wire system, the first in the class, which is smooth and progressive. The Koni-developed frequency-selective dampers that come with base TI trim work well too, though part of the reason for that lies with the fact that the system's mated to smaller 18-inch wheel rims rather than the 19-inch alloys that are paired with the supposedly superior adaptive damping system fitted to this plusher Veloce variant. A nice touch with that adaptive dual-stage valve suspension system that we're trying here is the provision of a soft damping button within the DNA driving mode dial, so you can have the sharper engine mapping matched with a comfier ride. That kind of useful option is Ferrari-like, but the engine note and the response to right foot prods, particularly in this lazier-feeling 1.5-litre model, is predictably anything but. Probably a future Quadrifoglio performance variant will at some point be along to deliver a little more verve, but for the time being, the Tonale must settle for being just a little more dynamically interesting than its class counterparts, which is a pity because it could, and arguably ought, to have been so much more. It's a good SUV, but perhaps not a great Alfa. But that, twinned with the fruits of the coming future product offensive, may well be just enough to save the brand. Again. It seems a long time since the Alfa Romeo Tonale concept car was revealed at the 2019 Geneva Motor Show and became one of the most talked about design studies of its era. The world's been turned upside down since, but Alfa claims the production Tonale has stayed much the same, faithful to the original. That's not quite true. It's certainly not as jaw-dropping in showroom form, but it remains a good-looking piece of penmanship with classic brand styling features reinterpreted in the name of modernity. Those who choose this car will primarily do so because they like the way it looks. You might not immediately recognise it as an SUV. Despite the black plastic wheel arch cladding, the visual vibe is hardly even crossover. But an SUV is what this car's supposed to be, at 4.53 metres long, about the same size as its Audi Q3 and BMW X1 arch rivals. The so-called GT line, an extended curve that runs from the rear to the headlights, is difficult to spot, but the target market should certainly like these telephone dial style alloy wheels, a nod to the rims fitted to Alfa's classic 33 Strada of the 60s. This style is mandatory and comes in 18-inch or, as in this case, 19-inch sizes, the latter with these emotive red Brembo brake calipers. Even bigger 20-inch rims are optional. The front end retains the overtaking presence of the original concept, courtesy of these distinctive Zagato SZ-style 3+3 LED headlights. The three modules on each side simultaneously provide daytime running lights and dynamic turn signals, plus on the move they adapt to traffic and road conditions while also lighting the way around corners. As in any Alfa, the other front end talking point is the familiar triangular Scudetto shield, now no longer a part of the bumper, but a distinctive element with the upper part of the familiar serpent-eating baby badge, framed by a little niche in the bonnet. The bottom part of the shield's V draws the eye to these two lower side intakes, which together with the floating Scudetto create what Alfa calls the Trilobo. If you know your Alfas, you'll recognise more historical brand cues at the rear. The curved wraparound rear screen, apparently simultaneously referencing both a Bertone coupe from the 1960s and the brand's striking 8C Competizione sports car of 2007. Even recent, rather mundane Alfas were marked out by really distinctive nighttime tail lamp signatures, and the Tonale is no different. This full-width LED light strip illuminating in a really eye-catching way at night. What Alfa's not quite so keen to talk about is the Jeep Compass-derived platform this car rides upon, which isn't that much different to that of the old Giulietta hatch this car effectively replaces. Overall, though, it's quite a pretty looking thing. A car ready to welcome you with a little illuminated flutter of its distinctive 3+3 headlamps as you unlock and approach. Let's take a look inside. They reappear again as part of the welcome sequence of this 12.3-inch instrument cluster screen, which Alfa's managed to incorporate without losing the classic twin-cowled binnacle you view through this chunky three-spoke steering wheel. It's a cabin that wants you to feel sporty. Alfa says it draws inspiration from the company's racing heritage. That's why the steering wheel's small, the start button's mounted upon it, and on this Veloce variant you get lovely aluminium paddle shifters that could have been lifted from a Maranello model. Fortunately, the infotainment system hasn't been. This car's debuting Alfa's latest UI system, which claims to offer the fastest processor and the highest resolution screen in the segment. This one, 10.25 inches in size, sitting proud of the upper centre stack and representing new territory for Alfa Romeo when it comes to digital screens. It's certainly a generation on from anything we've previously seen in one of the brand's models, and everything you really need is there: navigation, Apple CarPlay or Android Auto smartphone mirroring, over-the-air updates, a voice assistant powered by Amazon Alexa, and a full suite of Alfa Connect services that work with a provided app. It's all visually appealing and quite nicely laid out, but closer inspection of this monitor reveals a few issues, namely that the icons around its edges are small and difficult to see on the move. The cabin itself is a bit like that, smartly designed at first glance, but on closer inspection a rather mixed bag, with lots of different materials on show, not all of them really premium quality. Take the circular turbine-style air vents bookending the dash, which look nice, but have working parts trimmed in cheap plastic. There's more low-rent plastic around the dash. Most of the trimming below knee level feels cheap and thin. The B-pillar gets easily scratched by the seatbelt buckle, and unless you're a vegan, the shiny leatherette on the steering wheel and the dash top will probably leave you yearning for the real thing. Plus, the inset controller on the right-hand wiper stalk has all the structural integrity of a cracker toy. Still, at least everything appears to have been pretty well screwed together by the Pomigliano d'Arco factory in Naples, or at least it is now. The launch of this car was famously delayed by 12 weeks because Alfa's incoming Stellantis Group appointed CEO, Jean-Philippe Imparato, wasn't impressed by the quality of the prototypes presented to him on arrival. He couldn't do much about some of those iffy interior trimming choices though, which is a pity because this is so nearly an exquisite piece of cabin design and so much better in concept than the kind of thing you'll find in the brand's Stelvio and Giulia models, which give you the impression that the development budget had been spent by the time the team moved inside. Here, the brightwork and little speaker grills on the doors are interesting. The indented fascia trimming strip in the passenger side looks smart. A little tricolour Italian flag has been inserted beneath the gear stick, and the optional leather upholstery you can have delivers the required classy feeling of Italian elegance. Even the wireless charging mat is branded, plus there are lovely Alfa branded door sill scuff plates. You get this smart backlit dash insert, and the DNA driving mode selector is finished with a diamond texture, apparently inspired by precision mechanical processing with laser engraving. The red-stitched Alfa badges on the headrests of this Veloce version suggest a lottery-level standard of luxury, and we also approve of the brand's decision not to use the easily scratched, shiny piano black trimming favoured by most rivals. The seats are comfortable too, trimmed with 3D finishing, and on the base TI model are upholstered in a neoprene fabric commonly seen in sportwear. On this Veloce variant, as you can see, we've got red-stitched black Alcantara. Either way, you get adjustable lumbar support as standard, but heating for them costs extra. There's none of the instant ergonomic familiarity with everything that you'd get in most rivals, but unlike most Alfas of the past, finding a comfortable driving position is straightforward, though it never feels especially SUV-like or in any way commanding. That steering wheel is somewhat over-buttoned, but the screen you view through it claws back a few premium points with a subtle layout change as you swap between the three DNA driving modes. Unfortunately, though, none of those layouts delivers the option of the kind of full-screen mapping brought into your line of sight that you'll find in many rivals. There's no head-up display option either. Forward visibility isn't a problem, but there are chunky side and rear pillars, plus tall rear headrests to obscure what lies behind, so you'll need to make full use of the standard all-round parking sensors and rear-view camera. A 360-degree camera and an auto parking system reside on the options list if you really don't think you can cope. As for cabin practicalities, well, the usual cup holders feature below the gear stick on the centre console, and there's a deep lidded bin with a nicely stitched lid between the seats. The glove box size is reasonable, the door bin capacity isn't. The bins in some rivals can take big bottles of water and even a laptop. There's no chance of that here. A storage area at the base of the centre stack has the standard phone charging mat we referenced earlier, along with a 12-volt socket and, impressively, USB ports of both the A and C kind, so there's no need for the unsightly charging leads necessary with most of this car's rivals. Alfa has included the usual ticket clips in the sun visors, but an overhead sunglasses compartment has been omitted. Right, time to take a look in the rear. Now, pulling open the door, you've got to watch you don't get speared by this outlying leading edge as you draw it back. You don't expect a huge amount of backseat space in a compact crossover of this sort, and we're certainly not expecting a whole lot of room in this one, because its 2,626mm wheelbase length measurement lags some way behind obvious rivals, 66mm shorter than a BMW X1 and a full 103mm shorter than a Mercedes GLA. Sure enough, the Tonale suffers in terms of legroom compared to those two competitors, though you can at least easily tuck your feet below the front seats, and it'd be a challenge fitting 3 adults back here, though that's the case with just about every rival in this segment. Stick to a couple of folk and they should be reasonably comfortable on all but the longest journeys, aided by decent headroom that'll satisfy everyone under about 6'2" in height. This bench unfortunately doesn't do anything clever like slide or recline, but you do get an armrest with cup holders, reasonably sized door bins, each with a bottle holder, plus coat hooks on the grab handles, overhead reading lights and seat back pockets. There are also twin centre vents and next to them the choice of USB-A and USB-C ports that very few other competitors in the class offer. Plus, there are a few touches to make things feel a bit premium, like these red stitched door pulls. Right, let's take a look out back. Now, this powered tailgate's standard, rising to reveal quite a high loading lip and a load bay that looks smaller than the 500-litre capacity claimed for this conventional model, way more than a Volvo XC40, a little more than a Mercedes GLA and a little less than an Audi Q3. It turns out that quite a bit of the Tonale's capacity resides beneath this false floor, though despite that, no kind of space-saver spare wheel is provided. Above the cargo area base, the space provided is square and practically shaped. You also get bag hooks and dim lights on both sides, plus a 12-volt socket on the left and the usual 4 tie-downs. As is unfortunately common in this class, opting for a plug-in hybrid powertrain has a hugely detrimental effect on capacity, which falls to 385 litres. That's 60 less than the PHEV version of the GLA and 105 litres less than a PHEV BMW X1. So on that variant, you might well find yourself really needing this load-through ski hatch that's standard on all Tonales, mitigating for Alfa's decision not to provide the kind of more flexible 40-20-40 seatback split you get on that rival X1. Pushing forward, the 60-40 split backrest isn't aided by cargo sidewall catches, nor do the seat squabs fall completely flat. The room revealed when everything's retracted should be amply sufficient for the needs of most owners, measuring in at 1,550 litres for this conventional model and 1,430 litres for the plug-in hybrid. The Tonale range is exclusively petrol-powered and has to be had with an automatic. It's available in 2 trims, TI and, as in this case, Veloce. The UK importers having elected not to bring in the entry-level super spec you can have in other markets. In other countries, the entry price point to the range is also brought down by an entry-level 130 horsepower version of the mainstream 1.5-litre hybrid engine. But again, you can't have that here, which is why the starting price for this car at the time of filming in early 2023, just after its launch, was right up at around £40,000. That gets you a TI spec model with the hybrid engine in 160 horsepower form. It's £2,500 more for plusher Veloce trim. If you like the idea of the plug-in hybrid four-wheel drive model, there's a £6,000 premium to pay for that, which means asking prices starting at around £46,000 for TI trim. Again, there's £2,500 more to pay for Veloce spec. At the time of filming, Alfa hadn't decided whether to create a high-performance quadrifoglio version of this model, and there were also whispers that a full EV version of the Tonale might appear later in the production run. You're going to want to know about the value proposition these kinds of figures create, so let's take a look at that now, starting by considering the value merits of this 1.5-litre hybrid version. Now, at first glance, the premium compact SUV rivals being targeted by Alfa Romeo with this car, the BMW X1, the Audi Q3, and the Mercedes GLA, all look quite a lot cheaper, but that's because they're available in the lower levels of spec that this Italian brand hasn't bothered with here. Get yourself something comparable, say an Audi Q3 Sportback 40 TFSI S-Line, or a Mercedes GLA 200 AMG line executive, and you'd also be paying around £40,000. And a BMW X1 S-Drive 20i M Sport would only save you around £1,500 on that. A Volvo XC40 B3 with mid-range plus trim also retailed at around £40,000 as we filmed. Spread your net beyond the usual suspects in this class, though, and we think you'll find some more interesting options to this Alfa. If you prioritise efficiency alongside a sporty look, then consider the Lexus UX Hybrid, which at the time of filming cost around £37,000 in mid-range F-Sport design, guys. As we compiled this film, the same money would also get you the perky TSI 190 version of the appealing Cupra Formentor with mid-range V2 trim. If you're wondering about a Jaguar E-Pace, well, as we filmed, that couldn't be had in petrol front-driven form. And non-plug-in versions of this Alfa's Stellantis Group Gaelic cousins, the DS4, the Peugeot 408 and the Citroën C5X, can only be had with a much feebler 130 horsepower engine. It's tempting to make comparisons with the Jeep Compass, since this Tonale has borrowed all its basic engineering from that car, but the power outputs of a Compass in both hybrid and plug-in hybrid forms, both of which will save you around £6,000 on this Alfa, are significantly lower. Since we've mentioned plug-in tech, a few words on the value proposition of the Tonale in plug-in hybrid form, which we told you earlier was priced from around £46,000 at the time of filming. That's a fair old wedge, but importantly, it does get you four-wheel drive. Remember that you'll be stuck with front-wheel drive if you go for PHEV versions of the Mercedes GLA and Audi Q3, which cost only a little less with comparable trim, or indeed if you go for the Volvo XC40, which nevertheless costs around £5,000 more than this Alfa in comparable recharge T5 form. Again, an equivalent Cupra Formentor E-Hybrid is much cheaper than a Tonale, around £40,000 in comparable V2 form, but that Spanish contender is only front-driven as well. A better comparison to make, if you've an eye out for Tonale plug-in alternatives, is with the PHEV version of the BMW X1, which in all-wheel drive xDrive 30e form costs much the same as this Alfa, but gives you more power but less equipment. Your call. A Jaguar E-Pace PHEV has four-wheel drive too, and again more power than this Alfa, but one of those is much pricier, around £60,000 for that rather inefficient little Jag in equivalent P400e guise. Not tempting. OK, enough on that. Let's say you've decided that it is a Tonale that you really want. So, if your interest is going to be sealed by a generous equipment tally, is that what's being offered here? Well, let's take a look. Starting with what you get in base TI trim. The TI version defines itself externally with a satin chrome V front bezel, 18-inch dark finish diamond cut alloy wheels with coloured Alfa Romeo centre wheel caps, a gloss black body kit with satin side and front inserts, and black painted mirror caps. There's also adaptive matrix full LED headlamps, keyless entry, a powered tailgate, LED tail lamps and an alarm. Inside, you view a 12.5-inch instrument binnacle screen through a sport leather steering wheel with a start button. Plus, there's sporty black cloth upholstery, a driver's seat with 4-way lumbar adjustment, aluminium pedals, dual-zone air conditioning, a wireless charging mat, and a ski hatch. There's the usual Alfa DNA driving mode system with its normal, advanced, efficiency, and dynamic settings, while infotainment's taken care of by a 10.25-inch centre touchscreen with navigation, Apple CarPlay or Android Auto smartphone mirroring, Bluetooth and a 6-speaker DAB radio. That infotainment system also has Amazon Alexa voice assistant built in and works with an Alfa Connect Services app that via a My Remote section allows you to do all the usual remote things. Check your fuel levels, send lock or unlock commands, help you find the car in a crowded car park, get advisories if you lend your Tonale out and it's being driven beyond preset geographical limits, and so on. The Amazon Alexa link brings with it a few clever additional things as well. One neat touch is the link with Amazon's secure delivery service, which allows you to choose this Alfa as a place to which your Amazon parcels can be delivered. The doors will remotely unlock, so the courier can leave the package in the car, which will lock itself afterwards. The Alexa system can also be used to add products to your shopping list, to search for a restaurant nearby, or if you happen to have a home automation system, to adjust lights or heating connected at your house before you reach it, all while remaining focused on the road. Now, I just mentioned Alfa Connect services. They're worth telling you a bit more about and come divided into various categories. We've already covered the My Remote section. There are lots of others. My Navigation, for instance, which consists of apps to remotely search for destinations and points of interest along your journey. Plus, there's a Send and Go function, allowing you to send a navigation destination direct to the car from your smartphone. The My Wi-Fi section provides the option to share an internet connection between devices on board, up to a maximum of 8. The My Alert feature will alert the Tonale's owner if a theft is attempted. My Fleet Manager is designed for fleet management. And with the My Car section, you can keep this Alfa Romeo's condition and parameters under control. There's an inbuilt reporting service that sends information to Alfa Romeo on the health of your Tonale in a monthly email. Should you be involved in a collision, an emergency or a breakdown, you'll need the My Assistant section, which allows you to contact a dedicated 24/7 call centre for help. In a more serious accident, the car will automatically contact the call centre, providing its coordinates so a rescue can take place. Enough on connectivity. What about drive assist technology? Well, all versions of the Tonale provide for level 2 autonomous driving by combining a forward-facing camera which longitudinally and laterally monitors all the car's surroundings with built-in intelligent adaptive cruise control and lane support systems. Lane support controls the sideways movement of this Alfa to keep the vehicle in the centre of its lane, even in heavy traffic conditions. Intelligent adaptive cruise control automatically adjusts the car's speed to maintain a safe distance from the vehicle in front, and can work with the Tonale's intelligent speed control system, which alerts the driver of the current limit. If the driver accepts any suggested speed reduction to meet prevailing legalities, The cruise control settings will then be automatically adjusted. Everything we've mentioned so far comes as standard with TI trim. If you want more, then you'll want the Veloce version we have here. The two key additions with this plusher spec are big Ferrari-like silver steering wheel mounted gearshift paddles and adaptive damping. Clever Alfa dual stage valve suspension, or DVS, for an even more compliant ride, which works through that DNA driving mode system. Visually, Veloce models are marked out by dark Myron shading for the car's V-front bezel, plus Veloce badging and a special body kit with matte side and front inserts, plus gloss black window surrounds, as well as privacy glass and 19-inch dark finish diamond cut alloy wheels with monochrome Alfa Romeo centre wheel caps and red painted Brembo brake calipers. Veloce spec also gets you distinctive black and red Alcantara upholstery and branded aluminium door sills. On the PHEV version, you get dual chrome exhaust tips too. Have you more to spend? Then with either TI or Veloce trim, earmark the extra budget for the optional leather and Harman Kardon pack, which for just over £2,000 more gets you Alfa's gorgeous trademark leather upholstery, together with powered ventilated front seats and an upgraded Harman Kardon sound system. You might also want the winter pack, which gives you heat for the front seats, the steering wheel and the washer nozzles. And on a TI variant, you can also get the feel of Veloce trim by finding £1,000 more for a performance pack, which gets you red brake calipers and the brand's Ferrari-like signature column-mounted aluminium shift paddles. Bear in mind that you'll also almost certainly be paying Alfa more for your choice of paint colour, since the only standard shade is solid Alfa Red. There aren't that many alternative choices, mind you. Solid black or white. This test car's Misano Blue Metallic, Vesuvio Grey Metallic and a pricey tri-coat Montreal Green. While we're covering extra spend items, we should also mention the optional autonomous driving L2 pack that builds upon the drive assist features we mentioned earlier. This gives you a 360-degree camera, front, rear and side parking warning sensors and an auto-dimming rear view mirror, and can also be ordered with an automatic parking system that can steer you into parallel or perpendicular spaces. The autonomous driving L2 pack additionally includes 3 extra camera safety features: blind spot detection to stop you dangerously pulling out into the path of another vehicle, rear cross-path detection, alerting you to oncoming traffic when you're reversing out from a space, and exit assist, which will warn passengers if they're about to open their doors in the face of another vehicle, a cyclist or a pedestrian. Since we've moved on to the subject of safety, let's cover off the Tonale's standard safety features. Now, as you'd expect, there's a full suite of camera safety elements, including autonomous emergency braking that can recognise pedestrians and cyclists, and driver attention assist, which continually checks the vehicle's movements to detect driver fatigue. There's also lane keeping assist, traffic sign recognition, tyre pressure monitoring, and a rear seat alert feature that prompts drivers to check the back seat when they leave the vehicle. All the passive safety stuff you'd want is included too. Well, nearly all anyway. Front, side and curtain airbags of course feature, but there's no centre airbag of the sort that some competitors are now beginning to offer to stop front passengers colliding with each other in an accident. Even so, the Tonale achieved a top 5-star rating from Euro NCAP. Alfa Romeo doesn't have much of a history in electrification, as the mark itself admits with its slightly self-depreciating 0 to 0 slogan, referencing the fact that it plans to progress from offering no electric cars in 2022 to a position where it only offers zero-emissions EVs by 2027. That seems like a tall order, nor does it seem to give any currently recognisable version of this Tonale much of a shelf life. Still, Alfa has to start somewhere, and the core 1.5-litre hybrid with a small H, variable geometry turbo unit we're trying here is as good a place as any. we weren't much impressed by the efficiency figures of this petrol engine when we first tried it in this car's Jeep Compass close cousin, but it seems a much better fit for the Tonale. The Italian brand talks of diesel-like consumption returns here. Well, you don't quite get that, but this sleeker, lighter Alfa returns a 49.6 mpg combined consumption figure that's a full 13 mpg better than a Compass E hybrid, and the 130 gram per kilometre CO2 reading is also significantly better. More importance lies in the way that these stats stack up against opposition posh, compact crossover segment rivals. And that's encouraging from Alfa's perspective too, though the Italian brand will be irritated to note that the less sophisticated mild hybrid system in a directly competing BMW X1 S-Drive 20i delivers virtually the same efficiency figures. Opt for just about anything else directly comparable in the segment though, a Mercedes GLA 200, a Volvo XC40 B3 or an Audi Q3 40 TFSI for instance, and the returns are much worse. We briefed you on this power plant's 48-volt hybrid tech in our driving section, covering the fact that it's not really a full hybrid, but it gets pretty close to that kind of tech in the way that the petrol engine can remain idle for up to 47% of the time in normal driving, or up to 62% in town. Those are Stellantis Group stats, and we have to say that we haven't noticed anything like that level of battery-only drive assistance in our time with this car. Nor did we really expect it, given that the battery in question is a tiny 0.77 kilowatt hours in size. It is noticeable that startup is 100% electric, as is reversing, the brand calls this e-parking, and stop-start traffic progress, e-creeping. In addition, if you select the most frugal of the three available DNA driving modes, advanced efficiency, the hybrid power supply is designed to recover energy during both braking and deceleration. It must all work because the fuel and CO2 stats we quoted you earlier are impressively close to those of a proper full hybrid in this segment, like the Lexus UX. You do vastly better than that though in a family hatch full hybrid of this size, like a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic E HEV. One of those two might easily achieve 60 miles per gallon in regular use. On test in this Tonale, we've been struggling to see much more than 40 mpg. You can monitor things, by the way, using various selectable instrument cluster displays, an MPG meter, a charge power percentage display, and a hybrid infographic. To do better and get yourself a Tonale that really functions like an EV, at least for some of the time, then you'll really want the alternative plug-in hybrid Q4 model we've been telling you about throughout this film. This variant's vastly larger 306 volt, 15.5 kilowatt hour battery can be replenished from a 7.4 kilowatt charger in under 2.5 hours, and when full, delivers up to 37 miles of combined cycle battery range, which, to give you some class perspective, is better than an Audi Q3 45 TFSI-E, about the same as you'd get from a Mercedes GLA 250e, but some way short of the 55-mile figure boasted by BMW's X1 plug-in hybrids. That X1 stat explains why that BMW is way ahead in terms of fuel and CO2 readings, but the Tonale's readings otherwise compare well against class rivals, being officially rated at up to 217.3 mpg on the combined cycle and up to 29 grams per kilometre of CO2. Alfa says that the electric range figure would rise to over 49 miles in town, and that in combination with its 1.3 litre petrol unit, this Tonale variant could offer up to 372 miles of total range. With a plug-in hybrid Tonale, the advanced efficiency DNA drive setting sets the car into full electric mode and activates an e-coasting sailing setting that disconnects the engine when cruising. As usual with PHEVs, there's also an e-save setting that allows you to save battery charge for when you might need it later in your trip. There's also a downhill coast function that holds 31 miles an hour on downhill slopes, charging the battery in the process, and works very well. What else? Insurance is 29E for both versions of the hybrid. It's 37E or 38E for the plug-in model. With all models, garage visits are required every year or every 9,000 miles, whichever comes first. And if extra work is required, a video check service sends a film to your phone so you can approve it. Depreciation values will be aided by this car's supposedly world-first NFT or non-fungible token technology, which backs up the car's service history, stuff like maintenance records and battery pack condition, in a cloud away from the vehicle. This means that no one should touch your car without it showing on the NFT record. Alfa claims that this makes it much harder to forge the vehicle's records, which in turn ought to preserve residuals. We were disappointed to learn that the brand has elected not to continue the 5-year warranty it offered on early versions of this model. That might be something you can negotiate back in with your dealer. The standard offering is only 3 years. There's a separate 8-year or 93,000 mile battery warranty. It may be some time since Alfa turned a decent profit, but the allure of the brand seems to be as strong as ever. And not only to loyal customers, apparently Volkswagen tried to buy it as recently as 2018. And sometimes it's difficult to understand where this kind of following comes from. When Alfas were really Alfas back in the 60s, 70s and 80s, they looked and sounded great, but were unreliable and bits fell off. To address that, more recent brand owners have based mainstream Alfas on Fiat Group underpinnings, diluting the reasons people wanted them in the first place. The Tonale combines these two approaches better than any small Alfa we can remember, but like too many of the Milanese makers' models before it, falls frustratingly short of perfection, a little more difficult to warm to than its larger Giulia and Stelvio showroom stablemates. That's partly because the DNA of this car is a little less Alfa, and partly because, as we've pointed out in this review, there are a few issues that the brand needs to sort out, things you wouldn't find in less charismatic Teutonic rivals. The Tonale needs more assertive powertrain response and probably less hyperactive steering. Plus, if it wants to be properly premium, a little more care needs to be taken in the choice of some elements of interior trim. Having said all of that, there's so much you might really like here. The looks and the cabin are, as advertised, pure Alfa Romeo. The engineering isn't, but a lot of work's been put in to give it an Alfa feel. Enough work to justify a test drive if you've a sneaking admiration for the Milanese mark? Absolutely.